All right, so this is the Venus retrograde wrap-up. I'm sitting here under the Christmas tree, and you can see my golden braid Christmas gifts under the tree. That is the shameless plug. So, Venus retrograde, what does that mean? So any retrograde planet in the northern hemisphere, everything appears to be going across the southern sky. And then it stops, and then it backs up to a point, and then it goes on. And this is because of our relative orbits. Sometimes we're on the inside of the orbit, sometimes we're on the outside of the orbit. The planet itself does not move. It's just our perception of how it's moving across the night sky. So Venus retrograde happens less often than like Mercury retrograde, which happens 3 or 4 times a year. Venus retrograde happens about every 18 months to like 24 months-ish. And so what ends up happening is that it spends a lot of time in each sign. So this year it's spending a lot of time in the sign of Scorpio. And I think this is pretty significant because this last year, the sign of Jupiter, or the planet Jupiter, has been in the sign of Scorpio, which has brought kind of big changes to everybody's life. There's been this transformation that's happened. We started out at point A, we've gone through whatever process, and now we're at the end. We're at the, Phoenix from the ashes, and now what? You know what I mean? Now what's on the whole end of that new life? And so the idea of Venus retrograde, Venus is the planet of love and attraction and kind of aesthetic beauty, and it's considered one of the benefic planets. Jupiter is the great benefic, kind of giving, love and blessings everywhere it goes. Venus kind of softens wherever it's at in your chart. It kind of gives grace to the personality wherever it kind of lands in that area of your chart. It's how we kind of relate. It's the relational planet. It's how we share with other people. And it's also kind of the archetypal feminine within our chart. So being in the sign of Scorpio, which is all about, transformation and endings, it's kind of brought, I think, everything of this last year to a close. These are the final changes that are going on right now that were part of the overall kind of trajectory of the year of Jupiter in Scorpio. So we're going to be coming out of this phase around December 19th. So we are in what is called the shadow zone. So like I said, it passes and then it goes back. We're in the part where we're going over the area for the 3rd time. So Venus ends up covering the same area of the sky 3 times. So in the sign of Scorpio, and I think it backs up to Libra. I think I already said that, but I'm just confirming to myself. Yes. So backing up to Libra, so going from the energy of Scorpio into the energy of Libra, we're going from our deep, shared, bonded relationships. We're letting go of the self, and we're merging into kind of 2 become 1 in Scorpio. And then going into Libra, it's softer than that. It's on the surface. It's the scales, right? Things have to balance out. So if things balance out, then we can join in that union of Scorpio. I'm out of focus. Boop. Who's the star here? Christmas tree. So going from Scorpio into the sign of Libra, this is just kind of relationships in general. There's been changes in relationships. There's been changes like the Venus retrograde. People were changing jobs. People were kind of changing locations. Had some friends move across the country. Mwah. And this year has just kind of brought about lots of transformation in general. And so this Venus retrograde is really like, how are we relating to that? How are we bringing these changes into our real life? You know what I mean? And it's kind of through our relationships. So if our relationships are grinding, then it was kind of like, we need to make this change. We need to make that change. And I'm trying to think, like on a personal level, I also had the 9 of Swords was it the 9? Yeah, it was the 9 of Swords was my card for the month. And then a bunch of crazy stuff happened that kind of really brought up this past pain, which I think kind of Venus kind of retrograde in Scorpio. Scorpio is a lot of that transformation. Being a water sign, it brings a lot of upheaval. So there's kind of this chaotic nature to the emotions. There's the 20 years of Matthew Shepard passing, you know what I mean? Being a gay man and kind of having all these fears kind of come back from when I was, a teenager, like an early preteen, along with some kind of other stuff that was going on locally here in the news where I'm at. Just brought up a lot of this kind of like this state of, oh God, it's bringing up this past hurt, and have I really dealt with this, and am I ready to move on? And kind of my relationships were reflecting that, and kind of how we're dealing and healing and moving on. And that's kind of the nature of Scorpios, that we come to the end of cycles and then we transform, we come into something new. So having this Venus retrograde really kind of was, October, I kept saying, was terrible. October was not a fun month. I mean, that could have just been because I had pulled this 9 of Swords tarot and I was like freaking out about it for a year. But, there were objectively some crazy things that happened. So yeah, Venus retrograde, shakeups in relationships, things are coming to ends, you know what I mean? And it's not necessarily always bad, but it's because we're coming into this new phase, this new energy that at the end of this overall Jupiter and Scorpio cycle that I had already posted about. Another element of this Venus retrograde that kind of really also put pressure on things was that it was in opposition to the sign of Uranus, which is kind of shifting into Taurus this year, which I had posted about earlier this year as well. But with these kind of like Uranus and Taurus kind of bringing these big grinding changes, think of like coffee grinder. We're just like mixing it up. But in terms of what are we valuing? What is the value of things? What is my value? You know what I mean? You got to pay me for that. like all this kind of stuff. And then also with this, we're relating to people in a different way because we're going through these transformations and changes with this Venus retrograde in Scorpio into Libra. So we're relating in a different way because we've gone through these changes, and it's like, now who am I? And then who are you? And then we're like, so there's been this kind of grind with the opposition from Venus in Scorpio to Uranus in Taurus, and kind of where those have been at. And so as Venus gets to move on, Venus is, like I said, December 19th, we're going to start breaking into new ground there. As Venus moves on, we're going to come out of that kind of more intense pressure of that opposition. So really towards the end of the month, like with, because Venus retrograde ended, then it went right into Mercury retrograde the next day, and we just are kind of coming out of that right now. But coming out of the end of this month, everything I think will be like, we're going to have broken new ground. We'll feel more on a flow. We'll feel more moving forward. So yeah, that's the Venus retrograde wrap up. Blammo. Snoogans.